right, well, it is officially the year of the next presidential election, 2024. And at the top of that year, things aren't looking very good for Joe Biden. Black, Hispanic, and young voters are abandoning Biden, according to the Roper Center. Biden holds just 63% of black voters, a decline from the 87% he claimed in 2020. And Biden is trailing Donald Trump among Hispanic voters, 39% for Trump and 34% for Biden. And among voters under 35 years old, Trump leads Biden 37 to 33%. This comes as Democrats argue that President Biden is being underestimated. Kessler, co-founder of the centrist think tank Third Way, said, quote, Biden faces challenges going into 2024, but I'm baffled by seemingly smart people writing his chances off.
Those smart people are just looking at the numbers, friend. Meanwhile, other polling shows that more Americans want the government to pay attention to foreign policy issues this year. 38% of Americans identified foreign policy as one of the top 5 issues that the government should tackle in 2024. According to a new poll from the Associated Press, this is more than double the percentage of Americans who listed foreign policy as their top issue in 2023, per The Hill. Joining us now to weigh in is host of the Sabby Sabs podcast and co-host at the Revolutionary Blackout Network, Sabrina Salvati. Welcome, Sabrina.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
So are you one of these pundits who should know better, who's counting out Joe Biden's chances? How dare we all lose faith, I guess?
I guess so. I mean, for me, I'm just looking at the data. I'm looking at the numbers. I also saw a segment from MSNBC recently that showed that Joe Biden's approval rating is the lowest among presidents from the 90s and now the 2000 era going into a re-election. And we know that presidents that have had lower approval ratings did not win re-election. So I think what's really important for people to understand, if we want to look at the issue with Joe Biden losing black voters and Hispanic voters, I believe this particular segment of the population is surrounded by the issue of immigration. So one of the things that I've seen voters in Chicago and New York City, African-American voters, very vocal about the fact that migrants have come into their cities and Democrat politicians are giving them benefits that they have never given to African-Americans who actually grew up in those cities and did not come in by way of the border. So that's one of the issues that I think has been a recurring issue ever since previously under Joe Biden's election, since migrants have been coming in. That's one of the big issues that I've been hearing from African-American voters, particularly in those cities. There's also this issue of the fact that you do have organizations like ADOS that also has been addressing the issue of giving African-American descendants of slavery reparations in this country, which has not happened. The U.S. government has not seemed to find a way to atone for slavery for African Americans in this country, but they have given reparations to other groups. For example, they gave reparations to Japanese Americans that were a part of the Japanese internment camps, and that actually happened under Ronald Reagan. So now we're hearing African American voters that typically would vote for the Democratic Party become more vocal about the fact that they feel as though we are the last ones on the list when it comes to the agenda for the voters, for the American people, and that other groups are pushed ahead of African Americans. So we're at the bottom. When it comes to the Hispanic voters, I've heard a lot of them be vocal about the fact, again, with the immigration issue, they're complaining that it's not fair that benefits are being offered to migrants when some of them, they came into the country legally and they did it the right way. So they feel like it's just not fair that those benefits are given to migrants. But this all points back to the foreign policy issue. The reason why we have an immigration issue in this country that we have right now has to do with the U.S. government's involvement in foreign affairs in these countries. The U.S. government has implemented coups in these countries. They've overthrown leaders. They've stolen their resources. They've implemented sanctions on these countries. They've destroyed their economy. And that's why you have the influx of people coming in at the border. So I think in order to fix the immigration issue in this country, we have to fix the foreign policy decisions that the U.S. government has made in those countries.
On Friday, Joe Biden, his administration went around Congress to approve emergency weapons sale to Israel that includes projectiles and related other weaponry. Many people were pointing to that Friday news drop. Those of you in the news are familiar with how these things work, is that oftentimes governments will put out news that they hope to get buried on a Friday to get lost in the weekend traffic. And the reason why people might find that to be unpopular is exactly what you were alluding to there, Sabby. The idea that there does seem to be these workarounds. He can go around Congress. He can do executive orders when it comes to the agenda items that he is personally invested in this case, continuing to fund Israel and its bombardment of Gaza, but not certain other policy priorities that would go to the benefit of domestic Americans, including student debt, a $15 minimum wage, and other policy priorities, the PRO Act, that we were told over the last 3 years were impossible because of Congress. What role do you think his failure to deliver substantively on some of those policy promises from 2020 is affecting the shift we're seeing in voters from 2020 to now, keeping in mind that issues like reparations and the like have been ongoing, long-time concerns among certain groups without seeing the shift that we're seeing now between 2020 and 2024?
I think that Joe Biden made campaign promises that he knew he was not going to fulfill. One of the promises he made, you mentioned student loan cancellation. He did promise to cancel student loan debt for students that went to HBCUs. So we saw that that didn't happen as well. And at the same time, we have seen Joe Biden's administration give billions of dollars to Ukraine. Before the war with Israel and Gaza, the U.S. government was already giving Israel $3.8 billion every year. And I want to remind everyone that in Israel, they have health care for everyone. They have free college for everyone. In this country, we don't have health care for everyone, but our government can give $3.8 billion to another country every year. Our government can give Zelensky billions of dollars. Again, another country. Where is all this money going? So people are seeing a lot of money go out the door under Joe Biden's presidency that maybe before people weren't paying attention to foreign policy decisions, but now they are, given the economic situation of a lot of Americans in this country and all the money that is going out to other countries.
Yeah, depending on how you phrase this is actually, frankly, something that annoys many independent and conservative voters, that it seems like every other country's national security is a greater priority than domestic issues. Obviously, there's considerable disagreement over what's going on in Israel, but there is a very healthy suspicion of Biden and, frankly, of previous Republican administrations that were very concerned about goings-on in the rest of the world. Plenty of Republican leadership were very supportive of funding Ukraine, even as the base absolutely revolted against the idea and finally persuaded some of Republican leaders to take up that cause. So it's interesting to see. I mean, how much do you think Trump will actually, benefit from this dissatisfaction with Joe Biden? We actually haven't heard from Trump a lot lately on substantive questions, particularly on foreign policy questions, and it's not totally clear what he would do differently with Israel and Ukraine, even though, in the past he has been a voice for restraint, for instance, with the Iraq War. I think you could certainly fault the way he actually governed on that front, was not very committed to a restrained foreign policy. But is it the case that the voters you're describing, young people, black people, Hispanic people, are they actually going to say, Trump might be offering something closer on foreign policy to what we want, or is it merely the case of we're done with Joe Biden and we're going to look at third parties?
It's a little bit of both. Some voters have said that they're going to support Donald Trump. Some black voters have said that they're going to support Donald Trump because of the immigration issue and also because of all the money that's going to Ukraine. I think Donald Trump, in his last interview, I think he said he would have handled that situation differently. So some of them have said they're going to support him, and some of them have said that they're going to support third-party candidates instead because they have the correct position on Israel, like someone like Cornel West or Jill Stein, for example. People are tired of these wars. The American people, especially now today, we do have more social media platforms, of course. So people are very much aware of what is happening in these countries, and they're seeing images that mainstream media is not showing us, right? So People are tired of billions of dollars going towards war. People are tired of the sanctions. People are tired of American troops being sent to these countries to die for these countries. Like, for what? And what do we all get out of it in the end? There's just more dead people, and you're just benefiting the military-industrial complex. We just found out recently that the U.S. and the U.K. actually blocked a possible peace deal with Ukraine and Russia. So what is this really all about? To me, this just seems like a scam. It seems like a money laundering scheme, and more people are starting to call that out. More people are starting to be suspicious of how our money is spent in this country.
I think it's also worth noting that a number of people who maybe held their nose and voted for Biden over Trump in 2020 are not doing so precisely because he has been too aggressive with his immigration policy, pointing specifically to his choice to use an executive order to authorize the continuation of Trump's border wall, which of course was a kind of a symbol of all things bad about Trump back in 2020. But many liberals who support Joe Biden are silent about. Now, many more left-leaning, progressive-based liberal voters of Joe Biden's are saying, well, why would I hold my nose and vote for you again when you're going to further so many of Trump's policies that we objected to in the first instance? I also did want to come back to something that you said, Robbie, about there being significant disagreement about Israel. It's worth noting again that there isn't, in fact, especially when you look at Democratic voters, Biden's base voters, according to a poll at the beginning of last month. Democrats, 76% of them support a ceasefire, 57% of independents support a ceasefire, and 49% of Republicans support a ceasefire. So there is this ongoing question of why it is that Joe Biden is so far to, I don't know if you want to call it the right, but so far askew from so many of his own base voters and the electorate as a whole.
Right. I meant differences between Democrats and Republicans on the issue, as you point out.
But even then, basically half of Republicans still support a ceasefire, and those are not who Joe Biden should be prioritizing, obviously, as he's seeking to get his poll numbers up. Those are people largely who are never going to vote for them. We would never look at a Republican poll and how they feel about gun control or abortion or any other thing and say, well, Biden needs to be moving to the right to get that group right. We're looking at independents and Democrats who overwhelmingly support a ceasefire at the very least. I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in here before we wrap, Sabby.
I think people just have to follow the money. Joe Biden has received the most money from the Israeli lobby than any other politician going back since 1990. So this is where a lot of some of his decisions in reference to supporting Israel, even though the majority of voters are calling for a ceasefire, this is where a lot of this goes back to. If you follow the money, then you'll be able to see how a lot of these politicians move the way that they do and why they make the decisions that they make. So the short story is that Joe Biden sold out a long time ago. He was never really going to advocate for American people in this country first. He was already bought and paid for, and you can see that if you look at his funding under Open Secrets.
Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us here in the new year.
Thank you.